Hey everyone, and welcome back to that 90s pod. We are putting on our flannel, grabbing our Crystal Pepsi, and totally diving into NAFTA.
Whoa, NAFTA, a trade agreement.
It was huge in the 90s, and we are going to unpack its impact.
Super interesting. So let's set the scene. Imagine emerging from the Cold War. Optimism is high.
Right. The U.S. economy was booming. The internet was emerging. Bill Clinton, a new era.
Exactly. And from that, NAFTA emerged.
Okay, so tell us, what is NAFTA?
NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, was all about erasing tariffs, taxes on goods crossing borders. The goal, to supercharge trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
Supercharge, huh? I mean, it sounds ambitious. Was it 1,700 pages?
It was huge, all about how cars, textiles, agriculture, everything moved between the countries.
Whoa, 1,700 pages. That must have been some serious negotiating. So did NAFTA deliver? Did it live up to the hype?
It was a mixed bag, like a 90s boy band. Trade between the countries definitely exploded. And consumer goods, cheaper. Some industries, like agriculture, saw massive growth.
So, good for consumers, right? But what about those job losses we hear about? In U.S. manufacturing, that became a major point of contention.
Yeah, for sure. Some U.S. factories couldn't compete with lower production costs in Mexico. Closures happened, and there was anxiety about, the future of those American manufacturing jobs.
Right, and it wasn't just the economic stuff. It, tapped into deeper anxieties about, being American in this, globalizing world,
Totally. Those anxieties were valid. I mean, I grew up in a town that relied on manufacturing, so I saw those fears firsthand.
So winners and losers. I get it.
Yep.
But you said it wasn't just economics. Did NAFTA change, how people lived, what they bought, the culture?
Oh, yeah, big time. NAFTA fueled this whole new wave of consumerism. So many more things were suddenly available and at lower prices, because of those cheaper imports. And those big box stores, they exploded in popularity. Everything from clothes to furniture to toys, all at crazy low prices.
It's wild how much shopping changed in just a few years. Those huge malls were always packed.
And hey, NAFTA also boosted cultural exchange. Think Mexican food chains popping up everywhere, fashion trends, blending influences, even music getting more diverse and international.
So NAFTA was this accidental cultural mixer. It exposed people to new things and broke down barriers.
For sure.
Okay, everyone, if you're loving this deep dive, hit that subscribe button. Sharing the podcast helps keep the 90s alive.
Right on.
So back to NAFTA. Were there any attempts to address the concerns about the environment and labor standards?
Yes, absolutely. NAFTA, actually, it was a pioneer, one of the first trade agreements to include those environmental and labor side agreements.
Really? What were those about?
They were to tackle concerns about things like, pollution, worker exploitation, to prevent, this race to the bottom when it came to those protections.
Interesting. So NAFTA was about trade, sure.
Yeah.
But it also made people think about the bigger picture, the social and environmental impact.
You got it. It's kind of wild how NAFTA, this giant economic thing, also sparked conversations about the environment and workers.
Yeah, it shows how everything's connected, right? Trade, the environment, society, it's all linked.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of connections, did NAFTA show up in 90s pop culture at all? I'm trying to remember if I saw it in any movies or, music.
That's a good one. I don't know about direct references, but NAFTA's influence, it's definitely there, kind of woven into the background of 90s pop culture, I think. Think about the rise of hip hop and its themes of globalization, economic stuff, even grunge and its rejection of consumerism.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So maybe not specific songs about NAFTA, but it created this whole atmosphere that artists were responding to in their work.
Exactly. And it wasn't just music and movies, literature, fashion, even comedians were all grappling with globalization and those anxieties that came with it.
Totally. It's NAFTA had this ripple effect way beyond the economic stuff. It changed how people saw the world, their place in it. It's crazy to think how much changed in such a short time.
Yeah, it was a lot, a real whirlwind. And it's interesting to think about, how NAFTA's legacy is shaping things today. Think about the debates about those new trade deals, like the USMCA. They're basically updating NAFTA's rules.
So NAFTA wasn't just a 90s thing. It set the stage for how we approach trade now in the 21st century.
Exactly. And those conversations we're having about trade, globalization, their impacts on workers and the environment, they're still happening today. And in many ways, thanks to NAFTA.
Right. It's not making headlines anymore, but it's still relevant.
Yeah.
A historical echo is still bouncing around in our politics and economics.
Totally. What's fascinating to me is how NAFTA, with all the debate and controversy, actually brought the U.S., Canada, and Mexico closer in some ways.
Really? How so? What are you thinking of?
Well, after NAFTA, there was more cross-border stuff, like more businesses working together,
Yeah.
more exchange of ideas and culture, even more people choosing to live and work across those borders. So, in a way, NAFTA created stronger connections between those three countries.
That's an interesting way to look at it. It's easy to get caught up in the economic arguments, for or against. But you're right, those cultural and social ties are important too.
Yeah, totally. And that's what's cool about studying history, I think. It's not just about dates and facts. It's about the human stories, and how those stories still affect us today.
Right. Before we wrap up our NAFTA deep dive, any final thoughts for our listeners, key takeaways you want them to remember?
The main thing to remember is that NAFTA isn't just good or bad. It's like a complicated story with both. And it's a story that's still being written.
I love that, a story still being written. Reminds us that history isn't just the past, it's alive, still affecting us and shaping our future.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to, keep learning, keep asking questions, to really engage with history, even if it seems like ancient history to some people.
Well said. To our listeners, we hope this NAFTA deep dive sparked your curiosity. If you're eager to learn more, we encourage you to do your own digging.
It really is amazing how, like, one trade agreement can have such a long-lasting impact, good and bad. I think what really struck me is how NAFTA wasn't just about the economics, right? It kind of, like, brought up all these worries about globalization and what it means to be American, and those themes, they're still so relevant today.
Absolutely, yeah. And those anxieties weren't just like theoretical. They were real, and they were affecting people's lives. Their jobs, their communities. It's important to remember that human side of things when we're talking about these big economic changes, even if there are potential benefits.
Yeah, you're so right. It's like we can't just look back at NAFTA and be like, oh yeah, cheaper prices, more stuff. We got to remember the whole picture, right? The things that maybe weren't planned, the people who maybe got left behind.
Exactly. And that's where history can be so powerful. It lets us go back, learn from what happened, and maybe, hopefully, make better decisions today. Right, right. It's like NAFTA gives us this lens to look at all the debates we have now about globalization, free trade, and the government's role in the economy.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons from NAFTA is that we have to consider everyone, not just, the big companies or profits. It's about understanding the impact on workers, on communities, on the environment, and trying to create policies that are good for everyone.
Like finding that balance, right,
Okay.
between growing the economy and being responsible.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation we got to keep having as a society. Well, this has been a truly incredible deep dive into NAFTA. We've covered so much from how it even came about to its impact on, well, everything. Culture, the environment, even our sense of who we are.
It has been fascinating, like a journey through this really important moment in history, a journey that, as you said, is still going on in some ways.
To all our listeners out there, we hope this has made you curious about NAFTA in the 90s. If you want to learn more, go explore. There are so many books, articles, documentaries out there that go even deeper.
And hey, maybe you'll even find that, that mythical NAFTA theme song we were joking about.
Oh, yeah. If you find it, send it our way. Until then, stay rad and keep that 90s spirit alive.